Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Sweet Home, Season 2, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Eon Yu's situation. We're picking up immediately where the last episode left off. She sees one of the people that the little girl transformed into a monster from last episode, and just before she's able to attack, like, the little girl grabs the guy and stops him, and it's like, right, like, he's good now, don't you want to just, like, leave him alone? She even said this line of, they're all gone, they're not, I don't know if she was referencing, like, they're all gone now because of you. I don't know if that's in reference to, like, all the hostile monsters or whatever, because once again, there's the green, the yellow, and the red, like, the categories they end up getting put in. I don't know what she was referencing, but she already knew Eon Yu's name, and it's like, how do you know her name? Which we kind of get that answer near the end of the episode. Well, not near, at the end of the episode, could we find out? It's exactly what I thought. It's like, she is Yi Kyung's daughter. Which I was like, though the baby was only like maybe a month. Like, she was only like a month, not even a month though, but like, you know, Yi Kyung was only like a month pregnant at best, and like just randomly ended up like racking up to 9 months, and then the baby was born. So we don't know what's happened in this near year time frame. But it's like, yeah, the baby rapidly grew like that, so of course it would do the same at age so quickly. It's so interesting that she's practically like I would say a preteen. She might be I'd assume she's older than like Seong was, because Seong was like 9, so I'd assume she's probably like maybe 12 or something like that. I don't know. Might even be a full-blown teenager. I don't know. But she also had like that baby with that baby creature, the one that ended up actually tackling and hitting Eon Yu. I want is that it looks like it could be, but I'm not sure if it is the same baby monster from episode 1 of this season. The mom who like tried to protect it and got burned at the very beginning. I'm curious if that. I'm curious if that's the same creature or not. It looks like it could be, but I'm not sure. It looked a little different in episode 1, so I don't know if it's like, right, it's gotten a little older because time has passed, but it's still small in the same capacity. So I'm like, I don't know what to make of that. It's so interesting too, like if because I brought it up at the time too. Was that a baby that person had after becoming a monster and they gave birth to the baby? Whereas like Yi Kyung was pregnant and then that baby became entered that monsterization process. So it's like, how does that? Can the monsters reproduce and like have babies? Could the person have already been pregnant by the time they became the monster in episode 1 and then gave birth to a monster baby? Like, how does that work? You know, I'm curious about that. But either way, Eon Yu like tried to track down the little girl, but she couldn't find her. All she found was like, because they dragged that guy back, and but ended up just leaving his body as they kind of wandered off. I don't know if she purposely left the body behind because they realized they were being tracked, or she was just like, right. I guess it was supposed to be maybe a snack for them, but maybe the body got dragged back to Yi Kyung, and she's like, don't do that. Whoever, like, you leaving a trail behind, leave the body because they could track you. So maybe Yi Kyung's the one that told her to leave the body where it was. I mean, like, why would you take it other than it had to be, like, food source or whatever? After Eon Yu found the body, later, there was someone nearby that ended up. So there is another group out there, and they specifically grabbed the body, say like, we could use another one, because made it sound like we're out. So I'm wondering, do they use humans as like a not monster deterrent, but lure, as like, oh, we have a body, we could use this to kind of distract the monster so they feed on the body, or what? Not unless they're from Woo Myung's group, because I brought it up last episode. I'm like, in all this time, has he not made any moves? They look human, but they could be neo-humans too, like he is, because most neo-humans, I mean, maybe there's going to be a delineation between like those who are just monsters, who are just full-blown monsterized, versus those who are neo-humans, like a Hyun and this little girl and Woo Myung. Like, they are neo-humans because they are monsters, but they maintain so much of their human form that I'm curious. maybe that is going to be like a delineation between the different groups. Because the way Wu Myung made it sound like he was referring to everyone that turns into a monster as a neo-human, but we'll see if they will like categorize that a little differently. I mean, to be fair, Dr. Lim's the one who coined the term monster human, so that's the more... But I think that's supposed to represent all of them who have transformed. So that isn't just specifically for like Hyun and those of his type. So that's my thought about them being Woo Myung's people, like amongst the neo-humans, so they might... But it could just as easily be a situation of they're just from another surviving group. Because my biggest thing was I'd assume most of the survivors in the city went there, but I mean, it's like, right, Korea's a very big place. There could be people scattered all around that country who are still alive. There could just be little pockets here and there. I mean, there is no government oversight because what is essentially, I guess, left of the military is either just scattered to the wind, turned into monsters. I mean, the main people that were left were just the Crow Patrol, so who knows like what about the rest of the military, like army and stuff, whether they got folded into the Crows or not. And even then, there's not that many Crows left. As we saw, there was only like 60 of them to begin with, and now they're dwindled down to less than half. They're at 28, technically 27, because of the Young Seok situation, which we'll get to later. But either way, Eonyu comes back, and some interesting interactions she ends up having. One ends up being with Young. He's kind of getting bullied by these other kids because I think it's still that thing of because of his association with Eonyu, because they were like, oh, your sister's a bitch or whatever, calling her one. And I'm assuming they're referencing Eonyu. Everyone, because anyone that was connected to Eonyu, I think that's also why that group is so separated, because none of them wants to be tied to each other. Because we do see Seong, we see him with Yeong in this episode, him and Miss Han, but we also haven't run into Hyeon, like we haven't seen her at all since episode 2. Yeah, episode 2 is no. Like I said, I think we see her a tiny bit in episode 3, not unless she died in episode 3 and we just didn't get to see. She never found I guess she never found her dog Bomb again. I hadn't seen Bomb since episode 1. But either way, Yeong was kind of getting on, because this kid was accusing him of stealing like his baseball, because it's this specific one was tattered up, and the kid attacks him and calmly, and it's like, oh, your sister's a bitch. Like I said, I think that was in relation to Eonyu, because they don't probably know about his real sister being dead. So obviously that comment set him off. He pushed the other kid, headbutted the other one, and got on top of him, like mounted him and started punching him like crazy until Eonyu broke it up. And for him, he's upset at her because it's like, right, let me live my life however I want to, because what's the point of being good? I was good like my dad said, and what did that get me? Nothing. Everyone around me dies. His dad died. Eventually his sister died. Mr. An died. Dusik died. Like everyone, they've just lost so many people over the course of the show and over the series. I mean, Jisoo was the most recent death amongst the group. And it broke him. And like when you're surrounded by that much death, you start internalizing a lot of that and kind of blaming yourself and just also being like, well, what's the point? I'm going to live my life however I want to. I'm going to steal them and do this. Because Eonyu was like, if you hurt people, that's going to come back on you. But like, who cares? Because he's saying like, you get to live however you want to, so let me do the same. And he kind of sadly lashes out a little bit at Junil later on, because Junil was like, oh, have you seen my mom? It's like, your mom got turned into a monster. She had no... He's like, oh, so she'll live. Because he knows the monsterization process does heal people, and his mom is sick and dying. But then Yeong gets like, no, people are going to kill her just to spite him. Because it's like, yes, it's the reality of it, but he didn't have to be a dick about it. Once again, he's just lashing out because he's angry, he's sad. It's also like, right, why should anyone you care about get to live when no one I cared about got to live, and I'm kind of all alone? Because that, like I said, even though they are all still alive, people from that group are alive, they're not the tight-knit group they were before. I mean, they were, a unit inside of that, the Green Home apartment building, and now all that's kind of going away after all this time, so nothing kind of binding them together anymore. But yeah, Eonyu ends up also running into Chief G, who is like, oh, like, is this another person that dies? Which, to be fair, she didn't kill the dude. he actually in fact tried to kill her because you sent him to follow her. Once again, that was his own assumptions to be like, oh, she wants me to kill Eonyu. He made that leap all on his own, even when his buddy was like, dude, don't do that, let's go back. Still be alive if he had. But Chief Jill is trying to make it seem like, oh, everyone around you dies, and goes back to her husband situation. So it does seem like Eonyu doesn't defend herself much. She just lets everyone run their mouth off about it. That was also a point that Eon was saying, like, right, you let people say whatever they want to you, and you really don't fight back on or push back. And he's like, if you know, that's why he's like, I'm gonna be different from you. If someone talks shit, they're gonna get hit, type of situation. But Eonyu doesn't. I mean, she kind of put Chief G's daughter in her place last episode. It's like, yeah, like, I'm not one to cross or mess with, because she tried to, like, she took it from Chief G on, like, when Chief G was bringing up her husband, but, like, she didn't take shit from her daughter, because I guess it's like, you can't, you know, it's like, oh, you're a spoiled brat, I can put you in your place. But she's not trying to have any smoke with Chief G. And it's just like, I didn't do anything, but it's also, I didn't apologize. I think she didn't properly explain herself, because for one, I think she thinks no one would actually believe her, so, and she has her reasons. So, but Chief G is like, oh, I don't want you going out there to die. I want you to live so that you can eventually become a monster, and then I can kill you. Because if you are a human and I kill you, I become a murderer like you. And because you murdered my husband, I can't forgive you either. So she's stuck in this in between. So the only satisfaction she'll get is by killing her as a monster, but that won't do anything. She definitely has her own secret, because there was something in her room that was growling. I don't know whether, I don't know if it's secretly she has someone that's going through the monsterization process that she's holding on to, but she was looking at this darkness in her room, and I'm like, what is that? Because her and Tak had this whole conversation about, hey, don't you have some silver lining you're holding on to? It's, everyone's holding on to something to try and survive all this. Because she was like, hey, we need to kick Junil's mom out. Like, don't just, like, lock her up in isolation. Get rid of her. You're putting all this in danger. But for him, it's like, he's like, the real, because she was trying to say, like, yes, monsterization is contagious by the fact is that it causes people to panic and go into fear. So in a sense, monsterization is contagious in some regards. But from Sergeant Tak's perspective, it's like, I don't do it out of, like, sympathy. It's because I'm doing it for the greater good of these people. I'm trying to give them something to hope for, that they're not so lost in the despair of their monsterization, because that could lead to them turning into monsters. So he's trying to give them a little hope in a world that feels so hopeless. And for Chief G, it feels like, oh, that's stupid. Like, what hope is there in this world? But he had brought up, hey, you've got some silver lining that you're holding on to that you haven't told anyone. She doesn't really give an answer. But she tells Sergeant Tak, like, the moment, like, things fall apart and it's your fault, you're going to have to take responsibility, which she's like, I will. So that's why I'm curious about the June Il's mom situation, because she visits her like, oh, we had our deal, like, when you leave tomorrow, I can help you see your son and such. So I'm like, is she trying to release June Il's mom just to cause problems? So this way it falls on Sergeant Tak, and so is this going to be her way to try and rein back control of the stadium? Is that what that's going to be indicative of? She feels like she's got some ulterior motive up her. See, because I'm like, why would she? Not unless it has something to do with whatever her silver lining is, whatever it is that she's holding on to, which would be ironic if whatever she's holding on to is what ends up popping things off at the stadium and kind of ruining this safe haven they've made. Speaking of Sergeant Tak, we pick up in the aftermath of, like, that whole situation. After June Il's mom was saved, she was put in isolation, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry for all the trouble, but Sean Young is a good guy, being like, no, it's fine. And he tries to take responsibility. He's like, am I dismissed? But Tak is like, nah, it's good. It's like, man, you guys are good guys. You're really, really good guys. I mean, we kind of already got that from episode 1 of how much of a good guy Sergeant Tak is. He catches so much flack from it's out of a lot of people, but more specifically Kim. Kim seems to be the one that holds us, like, has the biggest issue with Tak. It seemed like you would think after episode 3, you're like, maybe that's kind of going away. And I kind of felt like he was kind of in a better position when it came to Tak, but maybe the other guy that's kind of like the new him wasn't. But it seems like, nah, like there's been a lot of underlining stuff that's been bubbling beneath the surface, stuff that was already there that's now bleeding over even more after all this time. Because later on, Kim goes on a tirade, not tirade, but he rants about, right, you're not responsible for our men. You're because he ended up finding out, wait, not only did this all pop off because there was a runner, that being June Il's mom, and once again, she was just trying to go off and quietly die and not be a burden to anyone, but ended up causing more issues. But the mine went off in an attempt to save her, drew in the monsters. So it's like, if she had died, okay, that's one thing. Obviously, it's still on Chan Young, because it's like outer wall duty was your job was to kind of control that situation, and you failed at doing your job. There's that element to it. But at least if she had died in explosion, it's like, well, it is what it is. But keeping her alive felt like even more of a spit in the face, in his opinion. Especially considering the little C4 they ended up gathering, they ended up wasting it trying to draw the monsters away from the stadium so they didn't have to go in full panic, like, let's go in attack mode. Like, him and his men drew that away. Because even one of those men called, like, Sergeant Kim is acting reckless or whatever. Like, why are we just sticking around? And took quite the hell of a sniper shot when he blew up the explosives. They couldn't do it because the detonator wouldn't work. Because the monsters do mess with signals. It's not something that comes up too much, but that's also into the whole, right, when you're connecting a call, why you can hear the monsters. It's because of that. Because they kind of create like a signal interference. But yeah, Kim was not too happy about, not only did we put ourselves in danger for you for such a stupid reason, the little supplies we had gathered up, wasn't even, because even one of his soldiers was like, yeah, I mean, we did good, but was it worth it in the end? For Kim, it's like, it was, if it meant the stadium was okay, but it's like, was it even really in danger to begin with? It's like, maybe not. But now to find out this is the reason behind it, it's like, fine, you look after the stadium, I will be the one that's responsible for our men. And so later on, he wants to go look for Yong Seok, but it's like, yeah, but he made his own decision. Like, do you think he is just out there on his own by accident? And like, he made his decision, and Kim wants to go find him, but Sergeant Taka's like, do you really want to go out there? Do all your men want to go look for him? Which obviously not all of them do, because some of them are wondering, did he just abandon his duty? Once again, desertion is a big no-no in the military, especially amongst them, because it's like, we're supposed to be a family, and you basically, not only you turn your back in a dishonorable way to your country, you're dishonoring everyone in your unit that's been like a brother to you, that's fought by your side. It's like, it's a spit in our face. And Kim calls Sergeant Taka a coward, because he's trying to come at it from like he brings up his recklessness, and it's just like, you don't want to be like me. I was hoping that you will be better than me, because I guess in the end, I would assume after, if anything happens to Talk, that Kim would be the one, Sergeant Kim would be the one that takes over. I mean, he did kind of catch some shrapnel this episode, well, last episode, from the explosion. He pulled out like 4 pieces of it from his back. So I don't know if he's trying to set Sergeant Kim up to be his replacement, or just he naturally would be, but he's probably trying to make sure, like, hey, you don't make the same mistakes I do. Like, you need to do better than me and be better than me. And, you know, having and feeling responsible for your man and wanting to look after him is fine and dandy, but it is a thing of are you going to put like the lives of the many versus the few? It ends up being, once again, that trolley situation of, are you going to pick all our men? Yes, they are people we should care about, but we're also responsible for all these civilians too. So which lives are more important? Hopefully, hopefully you're able to do both, but when the situation comes down to it, I think Sergeant Talk comes from the position of, we're here to sacrifice our lives to save theirs. Our lives are kind of a small price to pay for the greater good. And even later on, the unit gets into this argument about Yong Seok of, well, what should we do about him? It's like, oh, he was one of the other people. It's like, oh, he was catching flack from you. You were pulling so many pranks on him. Like, he just wanted to leave, and maybe he decided to leave, and that turned into an argument. And I guess it resonated with Kim, because now it's like, not everyone wants to go looking for him, and it's like, it probably got Kim thinking of, is it really worth going after him. But one of his men later on tells him about why Young Seok left. It's because he's seeing someone, she's sick, and he went to a hospital pharmacy for stuff. Now, when the platoon was like arguing about that whole point, that woman in particular, I think her name's like Jin Ah. I can't remember. Like, she was overhearing all that, and to the point she like tried to kill herself. I think it's just a natural instinct. Not that. God knows, I shouldn't have phrased it that way. But when she's trying to kill herself, she grabs the rope. I was like, was she second guessing it? But then Yeonyu saved her, and she got upset. Like, why did you interfere? So I think it was just her natural body's like. It's just kind of like if you try to drown yourself, like your body's just gonna like have the natural instinct to try and like get to the surface. I think it's just a natural body's response. It is interesting, and I think it's meant to come a little full circle that our introduction to Yeonyu was her seeing Hyun think about and consider killing himself. And what was it that she said to him? Basically the same thing she said to this woman of, if you're going to do it somewhere where I don't have to see it, where you don't inconvenience anyone. Because she's like, I'm doing this. Secretly, it's like, I don't want you to die. Because she was going to walk past her, but it's like, I'd get in trouble because if they find your dead body relatively close to where I stay, it's like they're going to assume I did it. They already call me a murderer. I don't want another body because then I'm going to catch more flack and I just won't be left alone. But also left her some food because it's like, yeah, eat something or you're going to die. Because it's kind of that same conversation she had back in season 1 of, I can't remember who she was talking to. No, I'm confusing it. It's a conversation Yuri had with Samwook about the whole, there's so many people struggling to live and here you are so quick to like toss your life away. I think it's kind of got that same energy with her leaving the food for her. But I guess her and Yeon Seok might be more of a thing than I thought it was, because it felt I was digging into him last episode, being like, yeah, just the way she like turned her head made it seem like it wasn't that receptive of a relationship. But maybe it's a means to an end being with him, or maybe she just felt bad of like that he goes beyond up and beyond for her. I don't know, like why did that be the moment that she decided to hurt herself? Because Father Peter had given her drugs, and I guess because she's trying to keep alive, but like she has to work for him. So I'm like, I don't know if her being with Young Seok is because of that, and she was feeling guilty of like, oh, he's going above and beyond for me. I don't really care for him like that. It's just a means to an end, and he's trying to sacrifice himself, putting himself in an unfortunate situation to help me, even though my feelings for him aren't genuine. I don't know if that's what that scene's supposed to, like, I don't know if that's what that represents, because I don't quite get that whole dynamic. So, and like, because it seems like her point with Father Peter is to bring people in to basically not confess, but also like to have these little sermons where people lament everything that they're bottling up, because it's like, right, the more you like bottle up what you're feeling and stuff, the more it's going to be the monsterization playing with your desires and trying to turn you into a monster, right? She definitely doesn't seem that receptive to Father Peter. It's just kind of like a transactional relationship. It's like, hey, here's these antibiotics. And the moment she had overheard that conversation between the Crow platoon about Yeon Seok, like she dropped it because I think she felt so guilty. It's like, I don't deserve this, and that's why she went off to try and kill herself. So like I said, I still don't know what their relationship is, and just if this is all just part of Father Park's like thing of using, like what that all is, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But getting back to Father Park specifically, by having people talk, they do have to pay in supplies. So it's kind of a bit of a side hustle. He also does seem like he has some freedom, because he's one of the few people that is, I think, considered a civilian that gets to just leave the premises. He doesn't necessarily need, the soldiers are reluctant to give you permission regardless, but he has permission to kind of leave whenever he wants to. He probably still has to talk to the guards to go, but he still has that freedom, whereas no one else does. He even visits Junil's mom and tries to hear her confession, but for her it's like, she was so angry because it's like, right, if there's a God, how can you do this to me? I've always done good. I've tried to be a good person, but God won't speak to me. Everyone talks about the monster. I try to talk to it, and it doesn't really give me much of a response. It does not talk to me at all, despite my, like, because I'm trying to understand why did this happen to me, and even the monster inside of me won't talk to me. I'm like, that's interesting. Is that her specific circumstances, or is that, well, because she was saying people specifically talked about it happening, so maybe that's just a rumor about, I mean, because that is what happens, but why won't her monster talk to her? It's actually something interesting because I think it's Dr. Lim that talks about it a little bit. Maybe him and Chen Young talk about it, but the world in which you go to when you're going through the monsterization process, when the monster inside of you is talking to you, we never really get that too much. The only insight we had to that was Hyun's perspective. The Manhwa, once again, having read a little bit more of it, does cover that a little bit more with, like, we see that with Miss M. We see her, like, little fake world that was created inside her because of that. And we got more. It was shown a little bit when it was like, oh, Hyun was inside that car with his family. Like, the monster inside of him trying to make a fake thing. That sequence is shorter in the TV show, but it extends a little further in the webtoon. In fact, that scene and the scene of him kind of having a little bit more control of shattering, all of that happens a little bit later on in the show, but in the webtoon, those scenes are all kind of together. Like the extensive sequence of giving into his monster self, about like, oh, you were in the accident, and his uncle and everything. Like I said, that's extensive. Plus, like, when he breaks free of that world of, like, I'm not going to give into my monster self. He has that scene like once in the show, and after that he never has to deal. I think that was him crossing that 15-day hump, but after that you never see that again. That all kind of happens at once, not unless there's more with that later on in the manhwa, but like I said, I hadn't gotten that far yet. So I went on that whole tangent just to kind of bring up just talking about Junil's mom not quite having that, it seems like. But either way, the priest was saying, like, right, your god or your monster was your son. I guess it's kind of like, rather than having something to kind of, that they were, your son is kind of the thing you lived for, kind of in the god way, but it's also the thing that damned you, like in the monster way. So he was both yours, and for her, it's just like, I just wanted to live for my son, and why is that so bad? I mean, the irony being, it's only in the process of becoming a monster does your life get extended, because you were dying from cancer, and now your teeth are getting repaired, your stomach pain is going away. That's the irony behind it. In a weird way, getting saved meant being damned in a more religious way. So it's kind of interesting. But speaking of Dr. Lim, this is our first time getting to see him post time skip, and seems to be straight up just drinking, not unless there's something else in those bottles, and he's kind of made his own alcohol using rubbing alcohol, but it seems like he's just knocking back rubbing alcohol just to get some kind of buzz. But yeah, he ends up talking to Father Park, because Park was like, yeah, is it true? Like, he's like, oh yeah, I heard something interesting about, yeah, the government made a decision to try and blow up, like, the main stadium to try and get rid of this epidemic. But he was like, oh yeah, Dr. Lim kind of didn't fully acknowledge it, but he was also like, yeah, but even if that was the case, why would it matter? So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I guess the general public, or what's left of people here, don't know that for a fact. Maybe people have heard rumblings of it, but the only people who know that for a fact are the Crow platoons, because they're the ones that shut that shit down. So outside of that, it could have just been like seen as like an accident or a malfunction or something. But for him to know that specifically, I think that's so interesting. But Dr. Lim's like, yeah, it's not that interesting, because, like, why does it matter at this point in time? It's been like nearly a year since all that went down, so there's no point in lamenting on the past. But he's like, oh, you want to know something really, really interesting? But he's like, nah, I'll stop. You won't quite understand it. But then he gets brought in June L by Chan Young, and he's fascinated by the wound, because he's like, it's a burn. And even later on studying, it's like monsterization without all the symptoms. Like I say, because even Home Dude we saw this episode and last episode being touched by that little girl, he's definitely more down the monsterization route, even though he hasn't fully, like his teeth and the way he's acting, sure, he's acting like a monster, but he hasn't fully represented as one. Like, he's not showing monsterization, like, not actually turning into a monster, even though he, I think, mentally is in the state of a monster. June Il is still enough of himself, which is so, I guess it's intent. Like she intended to turn Home Dude into a monster, so he did. June Il, she had no intent because to be fair, I think she touched Home Dude on purpose. June Il touched her. So, and she ended up pushing him away. Like, I guess maybe depending on how long the contact is, plus the intention will determine whether or not you're monsterized or not. So, but yeah, Junil isn't showing the other symptoms. He's not got a nosebleed. He's not healing from any wounds. So, poor guy just wants to go see his mom. And Dr. Lim, still being the quack that he is by doing his extreme experiments, and he's like, oh, Junil is going to be so important to understanding everything. I don't think he's had a real test subject since Hyun, and he probably let a lot of that die inside of him over this time skip, and now that quack inside of him, that like mad scientist inside of him, has kind of been reawakened for the first time. So he's kind of doing the same experiments like he did previously, where it's like, oh, I need to see how this will affect the monsterization process. So he ends up telling Junil, it's like, oh, let's go see your mom, because that's all he desires, that's all he wants. He wants to go see her, but no one would let him. So how that plays out, we'll have to see. I'm sure that's going to lead to a whole catastrophe riddled situation. Dr. Lim and Chan Young ended up having this conversation about, if there are monsters that attack specific people but not another, like there being two people, a monster, would it be able to attack one person and not the other? And then Dr. Lim was going on this whole tirade about, no, that's not the case, which is so interesting considering, I guess maybe he never got to study Hyun enough, but you know that Hyun was kind of a different situation, kind of a whole different beast, but it seems like, I guess maybe because he didn't study him enough, he doesn't know that's the case, but I guess he kind of lets that, I guess that's just part of his secrets he's keeping, because he knows that there are different cases, because Hyun was a special case, so it's like you should know enough to kind of comment on that, but you chose not to, because you're like, right, a green might attack someone but not another, but that's not correlative of it being an actual conscious choice. It's just coincidence. And it's like, yeah, the monster that you saw, because I thought he was referencing the monster from episode 1 of this season, but it's like, no, we find out later on he showed up after what happened between Ginam, Chief G's husband, and Eonyu, and found her with the red thing tied around her hand or her wrist. And it's like, oh, I guess he heard from Eonyu at the time about that, but maybe he didn't believe her, because he was there when they ran into Miss M, but once again, we still never found out what happened in the aftermath of that. She might still be out there somewhere. Hell, for all we know, she might even be part of Woo Myung's crew, like, after that. Like I said, we haven't seen her since episode 2, so I have no idea what to kind of make of that. So there's a lot we still don't know about what's going on currently outside of the stadium's view on things out there in the world. But after what happened to June Il and finding out, like, oh, there were 2 more people that were with him, all 3 of them followed Eonyu, June Il ended up the way he did, the other 2 didn't come back. And so Chan Young goes to talk to Eonyu and is like, right, you doing what you're doing is putting not only yourself in danger but other people. But for her, it's like, just leave me alone, just let me do my own thing, I'm not bothering anyone, I keep to myself. It's like, yeah, but I also understand his side of things. I mean, especially because I think she might have a little contentious relationship with him too, considering I think he probably also keeps an eye on her because of the time they were together in episode 1 and 2 before splitting up in episode 3. And who knows what their interactions have really been like outside of that, him being there when Chief G's husband died. Well, afterward, because he showed up after it, so he never saw what went down. But I guess he saw a monster running away at the time, but he didn't have the full context of it. And I guess that's always stuck with him, because I guess Eonyu hasn't really said anything, because she's kept a lot of that to herself, because she believes that's Eon Hyuk, her brother. But Chan Young kind of believes, like, okay, you are looking for this monster because it protected you, right? So the little girl shows up at the end and is like, okay, you want answers? Follow me. And before they could go, Yi Kyung showed up, and her eye is damaged so much because she's got like a patch on her eye. I'm like, what happened to your eye? So maybe we'll find out what's been happening with her since we saw her before the time skip. So that would have been like, when we saw her last in episode 3, plus what's happened to her in over the course of this almost year. So lots of really, really interesting developments. I'm curious to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.